Harry Robert Ernfield was born in Kutztown, Pennsylvania on February 8, 1948. Harry Ernfield was the youngest and was born to James Victor Ernfield and Bertha May Ernfield. Mr. James Ernfield was a bricklayer, while Mrs. Bertha Ernfield worked in a shirt factory in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. Due to the occupations of his parents and the time period, Mr. Ernfield's childhood wasn't always easy. When asked about his youth, Mr. Ernfield said,
When we were, but my mom always had food on the table, and we always got by something.
When Harry Ernfield was a kid, he enjoyed riding bike, playing baseball, and building model airplanes, along with taking things apart and seeing how they work. Ernfield enlisted in the Marines in 1965 at the age of 17. The U.S. Marines are a branch of service that engages in on-ground combat during battle. Ernfield chose the Marines primarily because his older brother was in the service in earlier years. Mr. Ernfield says,
He was like my first superhero, growing up.
when enlisting for the Marines, one is asked a series of questions that are later used to position them in specialized training that would fit best for that person's interests and hobbies. Because Harry Ernfield enjoyed taking things apart and putting them back together, he later became involved in things like communication operating. When departing for boot camp, Ernfield explained that it was hard to leave his family and friends at home. He said,
I'd never been anywhere before,
and he was excited to leave his small town. Training camp is very strict and is regimented. Ernfield said that the instructors did very well doing their jobs, even if that meant that they had to be strict with the trainees. Training consisted of running, push-ups, rope climbings, more running, and classes. According to Mr. Ernfield, the classes were very boring, and the conditions were humid, hot, and uncomfortable. Nothing in his Paris Island training was air-conditioned for Mr. Harry Ernfield, and that made things even more drowsy. During his training, he had a few instructors that made an impact on him, such as a staff sergeant from South Carolina by the name of Harrison, and a Sergeant Beck from Harrisburg, PA. Mr. Ernfield recalled that they were extremely tough at first, but softened up as the training continued. In addition to the standard training camp, Ernfield engaged in specialized training for communication, wiring, and to become a non-commissioned officer. When Harry Ernfield attended wire school, he learned to be a lineman and a wireman alongside his average Marine duties. He went to communication school as well, where he acquired the knowledge to ring wires and repair other means of communication like switchboards and fallen poles. All of Mr. Ernfield's specialized training tied back to the hobbies he enjoyed at home, like taking apart old radios and realizing how to reassemble them. After experiencing basic and specialized training, Mr. Ernfield was stationed in multiple bases in northern Vietnam, including Khe Sanh, where he was involved in a 77-day-long siege. His group of men were under siege 10 days before the Vietnamese New Year, also known as Tet, and were held on their bases for 67 days after. The fact that the northern Vietnamese soldiers were forced to stay and fight during Tet rather than be sent home to their families was used as a motive to fight harder. They also used the holiday to move all of their weapons and supplies to the siege zone. Although the American Marines were always at war due to the fact that they were under constant siege, they still had some time that was much needed to prepare for further action. Everyone at Khe Sanh, no matter their position, was required to fill sandbags for their living quarters. It was vital to the troops that they had the strongest base possible, and living underground was a big part of that. The Marines at Ernfield's base ate sea rations and canned food because their mess hall was shelled, and that's all they had. This caused their constant running even more difficult. Ernfield says that they were never bored during service, especially as a wireman and a lineman, for when he arrived at his base, he was put to work stringing wires and building up other forms of communication. Mr. Harry Ernfield was never engaged in hand-to-hand combat, but he did experience a lot of shelling, terrible deaths, and casualties. When questioned about what it was like to see such destruction, Ernfield responded with,
It's kind of surreal. It's kind of unbelievable, when you see things disappear that just blew up, you know, trucks, buildings, hooches. It's pretty awesome. It's, it's ugly.
While at Khe Sanh, he witnessed mass murders. Sometimes he saw people being taken out of battle and was left wondering what had actually happened to them. He wasn't informed whether they had made it or not, and sadly, Mr. Ernfield says,
And it was just part of being a Marine.
knowing all of the death and mystery contained in war, it's best not to make close relationships with any of the other soldiers or instructors. When inquired about his friendships within his service time, Harry R. Ernfield said,
I met someone, and the next day they were gone. They were dead, gone, in a body bag and gone.
This quote shows the depth of war. A soldier doesn't make friends in battle. He or she can't let themselves get too close, because considering the odds, that friend won't live to see the next day. In order to keep in touch with their families, the soldiers recorded messages on a small tape recorder and sent them home. When received, the message was listened to, and the soldier's family would record a new message and return the tape to wherever the soldier was stationed. This would continue until the fighter returned home and was reunited with his family. They also sent letters back and forth to communicate, but the tapes were supposedly more common. The creative terms of communication were great to keep in contact with people back home, but that never stopped the veterans from becoming homesick. Mr. Ernfield says,
You do when you're away, you know, and you're under that kind of stress.
Yeah.
You think a lot about home.
Mr. Ernfield stayed stern with his one-word response of no when asked whether he has ever felt at fault for someone's death. Even though he was proud of his service time and what actions he completed, death played a big role in where he ended up in war. Mr. Harry Ernfield became a sergeant when his was killed in action, and after being questioned about how his new rank affected him, Ernfield said,
It wasn't always fun. It was a lot of responsibility. I had 18 men under me that they had to be assigned to guard duty. They had to be assigned to get water. You had to send them out on missions, and sometimes they didn't come back. That was a little rough, but it was all part of the job, and as you gained rank, you gained more responsibility, and it was just part of being a Marine.
Mr. Ernfield went on to earn a Combat Action Pin, a Presidential Unit Citation, and a Good Conduct Award. He remained in his position until his troops returned home, and from there he continued his duties to the country in a few ways. Following his service in Vietnam, Mr. Harry Ernfield got 30 days of leave, in which he caught up with all of his friends and family who had scattered about. Ernfield said that loud bangs and some noises frightened him because of how he related them back to war. After Mr. Ernfield returned from his time home, he involved himself in weapons training and he helped to train new troops. A few years after his service, Mr. H. Ernfield began working with his local electrician, where he learned how to wire homes and put lights and receptacles up. Later, he worked maintenance at his nearby Lantern Lodge. During his work at the Lantern Lodge, he met up with a Vietnamese man who was a high-ranking Vietnam officer in the South Vietnamese Army. This man had managed to catch a ship along with a few other soldiers, and they escaped Vietnam before the war heated up. That's when he migrated to America and obtained a job working as a chef at the same facility as Mr. Ernfield. Ernfield was also kept in contact with a few other soldiers who fought in Vietnam, but these soldiers were alongside Mr. Ernfield rather than against him. Deciding to fight for his country during Vietnam wasn't only a good way for him to form great relationships, but to build himself a foundation. The Marine Corps gave Mr. Harry Ernfield determination and responsibility, as well as respect, and it taught him what it was like to leave home and venture out into the world. When asked what advice he had for young students who were considering joining any branch of service, he said,
The service isn't for everyone, but we have to have the service to protect our country and to protect other countries that are trying to determine their own destiny. be free and have the freedoms that we enjoy in this country. I think it's important to maintain a strong military, strong service, not just for our domestic, but for our foreign relations with other countries to protect them. It does give you basics in discipline and being away from mommy and daddy and growing up.
Mr. Harry Robert Ernfield went on to build his own home, where he made and raised his humble family. With flags posted out on his lawn and signs that welcomed one to the home of an American veteran, he remains proud. In fact, he says,
Very proud to have been a Marine and always will be a Marine.
"Your service time is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much."